Um, I promise no more emails today, but this is a very busy day, and we haven't usually had our international panel on the same day as everything else, but we just thought all you 1Ls have really been dying to get employment-related advice, and so we're just going to start with a bang here and have things going all day long. We started having the brilliant idea about 3 or 4 years ago to showcase the lucky folks who did their public interest work abroad as a panel, and it's always been very popular, and it has had results, I think, with kind of people passing on the fact that actually you can get these jobs. And so we have this fantastic panel here today, and they're each going to give you their names and where they work, and they're all from this summer, except meet one person, Jessica, and so she's going to tell you about her summer in, she's our only person representing South America. Jason, do you guys have a sense of what order you want to go in, or I guess it doesn't matter? And
Jason.
At the end, I have a few
I was going to say, we can start with that end.
about handouts that we have in our office. So take it away.
Okay, sure. My name's Jason Rathod, and I'm a second-year student. I spent this summer in Ahmedabad, India, working for an organization known as the Self-Employed Women's Association, and it's a labor union that represents poor women workers in the informal sector of India's economy, and the informal sector makes up about 90% of India's economy, actually, and that involves basically any worker that doesn't have regular salaried employment. So it could be like street vendors, construction workers, garment workers. It's a wide range of occupations. And the organization helps these workers by promoting their economic enterprises. So one way of doing that would be, it could be extremely practical. Like there's a whole class of workers in India known as trash pickers, and their job essentially, this is their only way of making money, is to go down the streets and pick up trash and then turn it into somebody. And so one extremely practical way my organization would help them would be, like they would hold workshops, and they would say, if you find like a bottle of water, you would get a few more rupees if you turned in the bottle cap and the bottle separately than if you turned it all in as one unit. So things like that. And then they help them upgrade their skills so that while they're doing this job, they could also take classes so that they could become something like a little higher up. So that's one thing they do. In addition to that, they also help secure the basic civil rights and civil liberties. So what I worked on primarily, the class of workers I worked with were street vendors, and I worked on a class action lawsuit on their behalf against the city of Ahmedabad, who was harassing and evicting them. And I can tell you more about that if you have questions, but it was very interesting work. It's a common law system, so a lot of the stuff I learned about in civil procedure and other classes carried over. But I also just want to mention a few reasons why I think you should pursue a public interest summer, and particularly one overseas. First, I think that it gives you great perspective on the world, and it's a good life experience independently of anything else. Once you're locked into a job after this, those chances are going to come by fewer and fewer. And there's plenty of ways to get funding through a PILF grant or other fellowships. And like, I would just say that on my way to work every day, I took a 25-minute rickshaw ride. And the things that I learned just from observing that day to day, really benefited me. Like just seeing a bullock cart next to an Audi going down, and then say like a shopping mall, 3-story shopping mall next to a 500-year-old mosque, and seeing this great contrast in a society that's trying to make this great transition, and being immersed in that really helped me. Also, another reason is that I think it's part of being a lawyer is not only pursuing what you're passionate about, which you may very well be passionate about, public interest, but also having a balance and cultivating an ethic where you want to serve the public good, even if you do in the end want to be a corporate lawyer or a litigator or whatever else. And one thing that was always inspiring to me last year when I saw in Pakistan that when the president suspended a Supreme Court judge and also suspended several civil liberties in the country. Lawyers from all walks of life, whether they were corporate lawyers or litigators, whatever, they all stormed the streets, and it proved to be very effective. And you don't necessarily see those similar things happening in our society today, which I think we do need to cultivate that ethic again. So those are two reasons. And the third reason is that I think it really helps you in OCI and interviewing come next fall, which you'll all have to be. It really sets you apart because not that many people pursue these kinds of jobs. So you should obviously be independently interested in whatever organization you'd work for. Don't do it for purely self-serving reasons, but know that you're not disadvantaging yourself and you're actually benefiting yourself by doing this. So that's all I'd say.
I'm Jennifer Lerman. I interned with the Public Interest Law Institute in Budapest, Hungary. They have different program areas. I worked mainly for their legal aid program area. I mostly edited these articles about legal aid in various countries in Europe and just the different systems. One of the first assignments I had was to draft a letter to the Republic of Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina, so that was interesting. It was pretty varied. They do a lot of NGO advocacy, and they also act as kind of like a matchmaker with NGOs and law firms willing to take on NGO matters on a pro bono basis, which was great. I fell in love with Budapest. I definitely recommend doing an international public interest internship. I'm sure that a lot of you are like me and kind of plan on working for a firm after you graduate, pay off your loans, and then do public interest. But who knows when that's going to happen. So I definitely recommend doing public interest while you can. Yeah. Sorry, done.
I'm Bettina Roberts. I am also A2L. I am a JDLM, which unlike the other people who worked in the public interest international area last summer, I think I'm the only one who combined it with the Summer Institute. I was in Geneva, and I worked for an NGO called International Bridges to Justice, which from now on I will just call IBJ because that is a mouthful. IBJ, what they do is they go into developing countries and they run training programs for local lawyers to better help to educate them in best practices. So sort of the theory is they want to do things like end torture in prisons and end the fact that people are being detained without counsel and just those sort of problems in the developing world. And rather than, there's a lot of NGOs out there that are going to prisons and places and helping the prisoners, but they kind of see a more organic approach to the problem as if you train the lawyers, they can help more people and therefore more people get helped. So that's what the organization does. And what I did is this summer they were doing their first ever training in India, and I basically showed up on the first day and they said, yeah, so in a month and a half we have a training in India, nothing's been done, why don't you just plan it? It's a training for 110 lawyers, go. So I planned this whole conference, and it was kind of traumatic at times, but it was an amazing experience, and then I actually got to go to India and be at the conference and manage the logistics from the ground, and that was really cool. So it was really nice to see. It was actually 150 people came, even though only 100 were invited, and that was logistically super fun as well. But it was great to see these people. They were just so jazzed to be there and to be learning these things. And we had trainers come from the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. We had them come to India to give presentations on how to give an opening statement and how to better present evidence. And it worked really well because, like Jason said, India is a common law system, so a lot of our techniques do transfer there. So yeah, that's basically what I did, and I would definitely recommend doing it, especially I'm sure there's a lot of JDL alums in the room, and talk to Dean Mayer, talk to Dean Horowitz. They're great, and they'll help you find something that fits you if that's what you want to do. So.
Emily, do you want to talk?
Sure, I can go.
Okay.
My name is Emily Sauter. I worked as a 1L in international public interest. I worked at a place called the Women's Legal Center in Cape Town, South Africa. I would sort of call them sort of a parallel to what the NAACP does here in terms of they're sort of a national NGO that works on strategic impact litigation, sort of in the stereotypical civil rights litigation sense that we view here in Brown versus Board, etc. So I did work in tons of different areas there. They had many different priorities, HIV, just poverty issues in terms of trying to help women get out of poverty. So So I did everything from working on helping select, who would be the perfect plaintiff for this type of case that we want to bring forward, to helping to evaluate the legal issues within the cases that we had already selected, to preparing presentations for conferences, to sort of writing a memo, I guess you'd call it, on how we should lobby and talk with the government about specific sexual assault bills that were being passed during the time. What else? What I think was really beneficial, I think the others have already highlighted a lot of great reasons to work internationally. I just wanted to stress how valuable it really can be to your resume. I would say that I've sort of done the entire broad spectrum of jobs. I've done clerkships, fellowships, private industry, public interest work, and the one thing that everybody wants to talk about for like a half hour at every single interview is my experience in South Africa. So I think it can really set you apart from the others. I think it's, additionally, it throws you into legal work that you would not get otherwise particularly as a 1L. The fact that I was, helping to prepare them how to lobby the government of South Africa on constitutional issues is pretty amazing when you think about it. And I think that's particularly true if you go internationally and into more developing countries where they really don't have the resources and they really, really need your help. So that's why I would suggest that you all consider international public interest work.
Okay. Hi, I'm Amanda McRae, and I was in Katmandu, Nepal this summer working for an NGO called Advocacy Forum. I'm actually the only person on the panel who decided to do international public interest for her 2L summer. My 1L summer, I was actually here at the law school working at the AIDS clinic. So you can also ask me questions about choosing to do it my 2L summer versus my 1L summer kind of stuff. But at the Advocacy Forum, what they do, they are a local NGO, so they're based in Nepal. It's all Nepalese working for them except for a few international interns like me. What they're doing across the country in Nepal is they're trying to vindicate the rights of victims of torture, disappearance, and other human rights violations that happened there during the armed conflict from 1996 to 2006, and then also continuing human rights violations that are happening, like police brutality, that sort of thing that's going on in the country right now. And so what I did there was I worked for a specific division that was trying to get justice for people who couldn't get justice in the national courts, the domestic courts in Nepal. We were trying to take their cases to the international level, and then also to try cases on a transnational level as well. So while I was there, I filed a case for one of my clients, and I had clients, that's something to know. I actually did work directly with clients and did witness interviews and client interviews, worked through an interpreter, all of that kind of stuff. But I took the case of one of my clients to the UN Human Rights Committee, got to see that filed. Actually, it was just filed a few weeks ago, right before their most recent session. So I got to see that from beginning to end, which was really fantastic, and do all of the writing for that and all of the interviewing of witnesses and all that kind of stuff. I also was involved in a case that we were trying to bring in the United States, a universal jurisdiction case, which if you haven't taken international law yet, well, you should, but also it's universal jurisdiction just means that some types of cases can be brought in any kind of country if they're crimes against humanity or that kind of thing that are severe enough. So in the United States, we have a law that allows you to prosecute somebody, well, not prosecute, but to sue somebody who maybe committed something in Nepal. You can sue them in the United States. So I was working on a case to try to figure that out over the summer as well. We also filed, while I was there, a case in the UK and a criminal prosecution case against somebody who committed human rights violations in Nepal. I would say, I had a really valuable experience working in Nepal. For one thing, as somebody who had finished her 2L year, and as I was sort of like the legal expert in my office, which was sort of daunting, I went into the situation, and our department was all interns, and we had our executive director, who was Nepali, who was a lawyer, but we were pretty much, for most of the time, on our own. And that was, the situation of being a real lawyer, is you're not necessarily always going to have somebody looking over your shoulder telling you what to do. And so having that much responsibility, I thought, was really important in this type of job that I was doing. In addition, I got to live in a least developed country, which I had not done up to that point. And I think that was a valuable experience. I want to do human rights work when I graduate. So that to doing that kind of work living in that kind of country and living in, particularly in a post-conflict zone and a transitional zone was important for that. In addition, I haven't had any interviews yet. I'm public interest, so I'm still applying for jobs, but I'm hoping it will be something that sets me apart from the other people who are looking to do this type of work when they're graduating as well. So if you're at all interested in pursuing human rights when you graduate, doing an international public interest job is pretty important for that. And I would recommend doing it as a 1L if you can, although as a 2L it was a pretty valuable experience too. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Jessie. I spent my 1L summer in Lima, Peru. I was working for a small NGO called Ciudadanos al Dia, which basically just means like citizens on the move. And it was an all Peruvian, everybody that was actually permanently there, everybody was Peruvian. But it was a Lima-based NGO, and so I know they still sort of dealt with the issues of mistrust that a lot of NGOs deal with. I was there through a fellowship program, so it was a mixture of law students, and it happened to be my year that they were all students from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, so they were all getting master's degrees in international studies. So the work that the fellows were responsible for wasn't specifically legal, like I wasn't working on cases or anything like that. So I actually really liked that. So kind of depends what your interests are. But I thought it was sort of, I'd majored in international relations undergrad, and so I was sort of grateful to be getting back a little bit to sort of, more general international studies as opposed to, just reading cases and doing stuff like that. So my specific projects was like I did a project looking at sort of the Peruvian code of ethics, and because their code, although from the early 90s, is basically the same code that they've had for like hundreds of years, and they just put a new stamp on it and said, okay, here you go. So the code doesn't really make sense anymore, given sort of modern day practice of law. So I did a lot of stuff sort of researching how their code of ethics compares to sort of the evolution of the code of ethics in the United States, and trying to take any insights from that to offer advice. For me, it was really great. The head of the NGO was an ethics professor at basically the most prestigious law school in Peru. So that provided tons and tons of resources. She also used to be part of the government there, so she knows tons of people in government and tons of people throughout, all of the major law firms there. So another aspect of the program was basically she just set up meetings for all of the fellows to go and talk to members of government, members of other NGOs, just like anybody that you could, like we went to the U.S. Embassy, we went to other embassies, like really anybody that we wanted to talk to, she was able to set it up for us. So in that sense, it was a really, really great experience. I also, I had never lived abroad before. I never went abroad undergrad, so I was really sort of aching for that experience, and it definitely provided that. And I think for anybody that's sort of questioning whether they want to go, the law firm route or do something else, I certainly was, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to go to a law firm. I didn't know, I'd always sort of had this dream of, working abroad and doing public interest internationally. And for me, it answered a lot of questions. I did not necessarily feel like that comfortable living abroad. Not that the living conditions were so terrible or anything, that's not it at all. It just sort of, for me, answered questions that, I perhaps was maybe more interested in doing private interest and then, pursuing these sort of public interests on the side or doing pro bono work in that area as opposed to doing that as like my sole profession. So I thought that for me it was really helpful to sort of answer some questions that I had about where I wanted to go. The other thing I wanted to say is that I don't know sort of the other members of the panel how well they can set you up with sort of talking to these people. I know that COD, the NGO I worked for, they are they always want interns. So if you are interested in Latin America, if you would be interested in that kind of experience, please don't hesitate to contact me, because I can definitely put you in contact with them, and I'm sure that they would be more than happy to talk to you guys.
Maybe more of you have comments about how you got your job, and I know you addressed it, Bettina, but how many applications you sent out, what connections you found, what sources of information do you use, things like that?
Sure, I can go first. Google was my best friend when I was trying to find a job. I knew I wanted to go back to Cape Town because that's where I had studied abroad earlier. So I made a list, created a list, sent off about 54 maybe cover letters and resumes a couple of days before school started again, so it must have been early January. And I would say out of that I got maybe around 10 offers. One of them being one of my top choices. And I'll also say that I'm not sure if this is true of Amanda's experience as well, but in my experience, the place that I ended up going required me to write 2 papers, which sort of seems like a lot of work after you've done the resume and the cover letter and everything. But when I got there and when I was sort of interacting with other interns who had decided not to write those papers and went to alternative NGOs, it was very clear that the fact that they required me to do this showed a lot of dedication on the part of the NGO to me, and the fact that they were going to really put me into really great work, and that they were well organized, etc. So if it is a hard application process, I would say that should motivate you to pursue it even more.
I sent out quite a few cover letters and resumes as well, and I ended up getting linked up with this organization because my parents are actually from this city. And we had a family member, a distant family member, who worked for the organization, and so I sent my materials to her, and she got in touch with the legal team there, and that's how I got connected with them. So.
I don't recommend doing what I did. I got really lucky. I literally wrote 3 cover letters to 3 different organizations, and I got this offer. So the way I looked for the organizations was I just went onto idealist.org. I knew I wanted to be in Eastern or Central Europe, so I searched by country, and I just looked at the descriptions of organizations that would interest me. Literally applied to 3, got this one, so.
I, as a JDLM student, we all end up meeting I met in my case with Dean Mayer, about just what we wanted to do before our institute in the summer, and I knew I wanted to be in Geneva because I've spent a lot of time abroad and a lot of time in Europe, but I wanted to spend 3 months in one place rather than doing like an internship in, say, France and then going to Geneva. So I really wanted to be in Geneva, and there's actually an alum of the JDLM program who sits on the Swiss board for the IBJ, the organization where I worked, and he takes an intern every year from the JDLM program. He works at Richemont, which is like a luxury goods company, I guess, and doing IP stuff. So we had this contact, and he kind of put me in touch with, he via Dean Merritt put me in touch with this organization, and I didn't apply anywhere else. It just kind of happened. I don't recommend that either. So, yeah. Do what Emily did.
Too much business. This is Dean Marr over here.
Well, my 2L year, I actually applied to a large mixture of jobs, predominantly here in the U.S. This is the only international job I applied for, and the way that I actually got the job was through a connection I had here at Duke outside of the law school. And if you're interested in human rights work, there's a lot going on here at the law school this year with human rights, but there's also a ton going on at the university with human rights, and so it's a great idea to go and meet the other students who are involved, the other professors in the different departments who are involved, go to the talks, go to the human rights working group meetings, because that's how I found my job. There's a cultural anthropology PhD student who had worked for the UN mission in Nepal for several years, and I just contacted her actually over winter break after I had been rejected from something I'd really wanted here in the US, and I contacted her and was like, how can I go to Nepal? And she hooked me up with this job. And got me in contact with the right people. All I had to do was submit a resume that emphasized my international law experience, and they saw I had taken international law, I had taken international human rights. That was enough for them. So if this is a job you're interested in, going to Nepal and working there, I can kind of give you the inside scoop on exactly what they're looking for when you apply, and I'm happy to write you an introduction letter too. But yeah, I got it through a connection I had. And so if any of the jobs of people on this panel interest you, for instance, the specific jobs we did, we are a good way for you to probably get some of those jobs, as Jessica was saying.
Yeah, I mean, the job sort of fell into my lap. I was really lucky. Felipe Lacaros, who's an alum of Duke Law, had emailed Dean Spruill and said that he knew of this opportunity at COD. He had done work with them through the Vance Center at the ABA, or New York Bar Association rather, and so he knew of it and sort of passed it along to us, and I applied, and that was that. So, but when I left, like, they definitely asked me, you know, like, we've had a great experience with you, we really want to expand our intern program, so if any of you would be interested in this or similar type projects, definitely let me know, because they want to hear from you.
I just wanted to add another thing that I thought of last minute. I got a great piece of advice from my mentor when I was applying to international public interest jobs, which I found to be very helpful once I saw how my NGO was looking at other possible interns, and that was to, in your cover letter, emphasize if you have any experience abroad, and emphasize the fact that you don't need any money. Just really come across as very dedicated and very independent. Because you wouldn't feel, I mean, you know, looking back at it, I didn't realize how important it was, but when I got there, you see how many people just really flake out on them, just never show up, or actually expect, you know, this resource-strapped NGO to spend money so that they can get an apartment, as opposed to, you know, helping thousands of people.
And let me add another resource. I'm Jennifer Mark, and I work with international students here. You have among you students from 35 odd countries, many of whom have themselves done legal work or volunteer work while they were in their law schools. Identify them. If you know a specific region that you want to go to, there's a language that you speak to them. And they're a great resource right here, right now. And Felipe de Carros was in the LLM program years ago. There are also resources as alumni that we can help steer you to. But great, reach out. International Week, reach out this week and make friends and start talking about organizations in their countries.
And before I open it to questions, so think about your questions. We had some handouts in our office, including a list that Dean Marr put together of all the alums you can think of who are in public international work. So we've got that list. We've got an article that Tanya wrote last year from the panel that gives advice. We've got a top 10 kind of mainstream international organizations list that one of our students wrote one time. There is this Harvard guide. This is their international volume. They have another volume that's domestic. And this is actually now available on the PS LawNet website. I'm surprised no one relied on PS LawNet. Nobody relied on. So that's a kind of our main source for public interest law jobs, supposedly. And supposedly it's very comprehensive internationally as well. That website and my other all you need to know in 2 pages handout is here that we're going to have at the event today, or people could have it now as well. There are a few more people who've done work the last 2 summers who weren't here to speak, so they're a resource for you. And we also have lists going back to 2000 of where everyone worked in the summer, so you can get on the alumni directory and contact any alums that might fit your own interest. And most of these folks up here will be at the table talk today, where we have an international table as well as a lot of other ones. I guess that's enough for me to say now. Let's see what your questions are.
Angela? Yeah, go ahead.
Could y'all talk about the various sources of funding that you got? I mean, I know PILF has a great grant, but that seems to like cut out your flight costs alone pretty much.
Sure. I may be the funding guru, but there are several different sources of funding just here at the law school that you can apply for. In addition to PILF, which if you do your 20 hours, you will almost certainly get some money, maybe not a full grant if you get other funding, but you can also go through the Pro Bono and Public Interest Office. For the past couple of years, they, because of generous alumni, have been able to offer an international development grant for people. And I think, Bettina, were you the only one who got that with me last year? So I got through that grant $4,300. And then from PILF, I got an additional $1,800, which brought me up to $6,100, which was more than enough to live on in Nepal and pay for my plane ticket
Not in
and
Geneva,
everything.
just so you
Not
know.
in Geneva, but in Nepal it was more than enough to live on. So those are, and there are also other grants offered by the Pro Bono and Public Interest Office. So if you don't get one of the international development ones, you could get one of the other sort of named grants that's offered by them. They're all grants around $4,300 if you're going internationally. But those are the main sources. If you're doing human rights work, I know of a couple of other grant programs out there that are extremely competitive and offer like $1 grant a year to somebody doing stuff. Like there's the Helton Fellowship, for instance, that I've read about that gives out a couple of $1,000s to people to kind of help them do that sort of thing. But I think really the law school is a good place to start, and I think talking more with Dean Sproul and with Dean Marr about those funding opportunities is a good idea.
But to be honest, like, if you're careful about how much you spend on your plane ticket, which you can by finding cheap fares, like, you're almost better, depending on where you're almost better going abroad than staying here. Like, the cost of living in Peru was so much cheaper that my $3,500 went a really long way, and I had no problem, like compared to the other fellows that were there, like, I was in the money, so you'll be fine.
Also, one other source of funding, if any of you are pursuing a master's in another department, a lot of times they will give you a little bit of money to in the summer. I know my department was very happy with that.
Yeah, I just had a question. Obviously, the JDLMs were half of the summer is taken out with classes. In your situations, I know, Bettina, you're the only JDLM up there, and you were able to split. You were only able to do it for like 6 weeks or 7 weeks or whatever. Is that possible? Like, how were you able to arrange that? It seems like a very short amount of time.
What happened for me, and I don't know if I would necessarily recommend this, but I took my last exam on a Friday. That Saturday I flew overnight to Geneva, and Monday morning I was at the office. They wanted 10 weeks, I wanted 6 weeks. We split the baby at 8. And I worked right up into the day I started the institute. I actually ended up working through the institute because I was still in Geneva, and I worked the whole way through. That was my decision. I didn't have to do that. I was just really jazzed about what I was doing, and I had the time, so I did it. I think that most places will be flexible. You do have the full 8 weeks. It's not the greatest idea in the world, but if you really want the job and that's the only way to do it, like, that's the decision I made. So I think it kind of depends on where you're going to.
And for the rest of you, would that have been possible to do not a full summer, 2/3 of a summer, half a summer?
At my place, they wanted 10 weeks from us. That probably could have been negotiated, but none of us tried. But they did specifically say when we applied that they wanted 10 weeks.
I know there were some interns at my office that worked as little as 4 weeks, but that was as little as they could.
My office definitely wanted 10 weeks. 10 weeks is such a short time that I really don't know that there's a point to even split your summer, because you really won't get a feel for, I guess, living abroad in whatever country you're living in or the organization that you're working for. So I don't think I would recommend splitting. But
Mine is pretty
You don't have a
flexible.
choice.
Yeah.
It has to be split.
I would add also that if you do it in the same place as the institute you're thinking of doing, whether it's Geneva or Hong Kong, if your job is there, then if you offer to kind of do what you can while the institute is going on, pending that being possible, then that kind of mitigates the time commitment.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the language skills that were required for each internship? I guess I realize some that might not require foreign language, obviously would.
I thought that was an issue, actually. Granted, my Spanish should be fluent, because I have taken it since 3rd grade. But I came to law school and I hadn't spoken it since college, and so I was sort of nervous about that. My Spanish was fine, and I made it through the summer. But I definitely think that's something you need to consider and really talk to people about before you go. I think it was fine. My Spanish skills turned out okay, and they improved a lot. If my Spanish skills had been better going into this internship, the experience for me would have been 20 times better. Because it really, and it could be that, maybe English is the language spoken in the office and it's not that big of a deal, but where I was, Spanish was the language spoken. We were given presentations in Spanish. you know, all of the resources that we had were in Spanish. You know, everything's in Spanish, and that's to be expected. You're in a Spanish-speaking country. And so I found, you know, sometimes like I had difficulty with that, and I wouldn't say don't go, but I definitely think depending on the situation, it's something you need to consider.
In Nepal, English was fine. I took Nepali lessons, but I was the only intern who took Nepali lessons. And they only came in marginally useful, at least in the work that I was doing. In my regular life, they came in a little bit more useful. But yeah, English was in Nepal is very widely spoken.
I do speak French, but I didn't need it at all for work. The NGO, most of the people who work there are either American or the language in the office is English. And Geneva is an international enough city that you could get by without speaking French. It's useful, and I mean I spoke French in my daily life. My roommate only spoke French, but it wasn't necessary at all.
Keely was founded by a Columbia law professor, and while there are like there are some Hungarians who work there, there's some people from other countries, everyone speaks English. Everything we do is in English. Living in Hungary, I got really good at sign language. I don't speak Hungarian, so I picked up a few words like thank you. That was about it for the entire, it's a really difficult language, but it was great. Most people speak English, so.
English was the language of all the law I worked with in India, but like was mentioned earlier, my experience probably would have been 20 times better if I was more fluent or if I had a better command of Gujarati, which is the state language where I was at. And I don't think that's necessarily true in other parts of India. If you go to some of the other major cities, like Bombay or Delhi, I think you could probably get by strictly with English, but everyone in my office spoke Gujarati, and we would go out and educate street vendors on their rights and things, and that would all be conducted in Gujarati. So I think it's definitely something you need to consider.
And in South Africa, there are 11 official languages, but sort of the one common denominator is English, so it really wasn't an issue at all. I think the only time I ever even ran into another language was when I was trying to read an apartheid-era decision, but it wasn't an issue at all.
Any other questions? Any other resources in the audience? Anyone else with contacts they want to share with everyone else or ideas of what to do? Okay, further thoughts, panelists?
Oh,
Yeah.
I really appreciate what you said about like what you thought you wanted to do and where you came to after having that experience. So I'd like to hear from the other people what their plans are for the future now and if that was influenced by their summer experience.
To a certain extent, mine was. I mean, I came into law school kind of focused on one thing, which is human rights, and I'm still there. So I guess that tells you something. One of the reasons I wanted to go to Nepal, in addition to doing some awesome work and living in Nepal, was to test out whether I could live in at least developed country or just another country in general as well. And now my future plans are I could live here or anywhere, I think, at this point. And I felt pretty comfortable there while I was living there. So to me, it did have an influence. It did allow me to test out whether or not I was, up to it, I guess. And it turns out that I think I can do that. So that definitely had an influence on what I'm looking for next year.
I went into the summer knowing that I was interested in criminal defense, but not knowing that it was what I wanted to do. And I came away from the summer being 100% sure that that's what I want to do, which is good, I guess. So next summer, what I really want to do is work at a public defender's office. So that definitely came out of getting to interact with public defenders during my internship. And in terms of living abroad, I know that I will do it again in the future, probably for a while, but I know, and I knew that already though, so it just helps solidify.
I really enjoy living abroad, but I kind of did realize that I probably can't live abroad forever, which I kind of thought I could. It was like the little differences, like the milk. It's totally different, and that was really bothering me. I'm serious because it's like it lasts for 6 months and it's not refrigerated. So it freaked me out. And I knew about that, but I didn't know it bothered me so much.
The way I approached it was that I also had the milk dilemma now. I knew going in that I wanted to practice in the U.S., and so I just thought of it as a good life experience that I would have after my 1L year. And it turned out to be that, and I'm going to practice in D.C. So that's it.
For me, it was both helpful to figure out what I want to do and what I don't want to do in a couple of ways. I really liked the sort of national policy, NGO, strategic impact litigation structure. So I learned that about myself, and I similarly learned that I don't think a life abroad, at least in South Africa, the way it is now, long term, even though I love it, I don't think it would be for me long term. And so I'm still, trying to figure out the same way that I think probably everybody is how to get there in the long term. I've been looking at different things like clerkships and such.
I just want to add one other thing. My sort of decision not to do that, I mean, living in Lima's, none of you are from Lima. Lima's not the greatest city in the world, but it wasn't that like I hated living abroad so much. It's just that I think I wasn't prepared for sort of the moral issues that I think came along with working at an NGO and doing, so many of these things. A lot of the times, like, I just sort of felt like I was confronted with this issue of like, who am I to be telling these people how to be living their lives, or this is how they should be running their country, and I had a lot of problems with that, and I found the work to be, although I'm really glad that I did it and it was a great experience, I found it so frustrating because all you want to do is help, but then everything that you try to do and help, you sort of question yourself, well, is it really appropriate for me to be doing these things, and what is the real role of this, and what should their role be? And at the end of the summer, I sort of just felt, in a lot of ways, I felt defeated, and I thought, well, I can't do this every day. This would be too depressing for me to do every day. So that's sort of another flip side of your decision about whether or not that's the line of work that you want to go in. And for me, that was sort of the real determining factor. But I could do this stuff and try and do my best to help part-time, but to do this every day for me would just take too much out of me.
Well, here's a frivolous question. What was the most exciting, interesting, bizarre, and I'm inspired by what I know Amanda did, so we'll start with you.
All right, well, on a weekend in Nepal, I went with a couple of the other interns from our office bungee jumping. Actually I went canyon swinging, but it's sort of the same thing. You're still doing a free fall, except for canyon swinging is more exciting because you free fall for longer than you do bungee jumping. Anyway, off the highest canyon swing in the world, which happens to be in Nepal. And that was pretty exciting. And I don't know what got into me this summer. I'm usually not really a daredevil, but I think just I already made this decision to go to at least a developing country and live in Katmandu, and I was like, heck, why not? So that was pretty cool. You can do a lot of that kind of stuff in Nepal. Another reason to go there. The worst part of it though is you get down and you have all this adrenaline, and you're like, cool, yeah, I just did this canyon swing, and then you have to walk back up, which they don't tell you before you do it. You have to hike back up, and it took like an hour to hike back up, and my adrenaline was gone, and my feet were covered with leeches, and it was, anyway, it was interesting, but that's something that you too can do in Nepal. So.
Did anyone compete with that?
I went sandboarding. That was really fun. I don't know if it really competes with that, but they have these like amazing dunes. I'm from Chicago, so I think of like the Indiana dunes, and I think they're big. Well, Indiana dunes pale in comparison to what's there, so it was really fun. And you can take weekend trips with this internship all around Peru and Latin America. So.
I mean, I ended up actually going back to India for the last 2 weeks of the summer to travel with there was an intern also in New Delhi for the whole summer working for my organization. And when I went for the conference, we met and we got along, so we're like, hey, let's backpack around India. So I ended up going back to India since I had this great Indian visa that my company had paid for, and backpacking all around South India for 2.5 weeks. So I guess, while not one individual leech-filled moment, that was pretty fun.
So an 8-week job, a
4-week.
an Geneva Institute, and then another second trip to India all in one summer.
Yeah, it was full. I needed a nap when I got home.
Budapest is really close to a lot of other countries and cities, so it's not like bizarre, but it was a lot of fun. We just traveled around pretty much every weekend. I almost regret it because I loved Budapest so much, but I really wanted to, I guess while I was in the area and go all over the place. I went to Bratislava, which was interesting for half a day, but there's not that much to do there, but that was cool. I can say I went, so.
Near the end of my summer, I met up with some friends who are doing public interest work in Thailand, actually, and so one of the things I did in Thailand that was really fun was I rode elephants through a forest, so yeah, it's cool.
I stuck to the more tame things this time around. I had already been to South Africa, so I'd done some crazy things back then. But I did more of the, I guess I'm maturing maybe as I get older, but I did some wine tasting. Nothing too crazy this time.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for